What if I told you the most explosive years of Jesus' life are not the years we read about? What if the real mystery is not the miracles, but the silence? What if the missing 18 years were not empty, but sacred? And what if the hands that shaped wood in Nazareth were the same hands that would later be nailed to a cross? Not a myth, not a legend, a possibility that changes everything. And the Bible's silence might be the loudest message of all. This is the hidden life of Jesus, the years between the manger and the ministry, the years the gospel doesn't narrate in detail, but the years that shape the Savior. Now listen carefully. The Bible's silence is not a void. It is not a gap. It is not an oversight. It is an encrypted message. The silence itself is the sermon. The Bible's silence is God's encrypted message, telling us that Christ's mission did not begin with miracles, but with obedience. And if you are someone who has ever felt invisible, unnoticed, or ordinary, then this is the message you were waiting for. Because the hidden years are not just about Jesus, they are about you. Welcome to Understanding the Word. I'm Pastor Najam. When we read the Gospels, we see Jesus at 12, speaking with teachers in the temple. And then nothing. No public sermons, no miracles, no crowds. Just a sudden jump. The Gospel moves from childhood to ministry, as if the years between were not worth telling. But what if those years were the most important? What if the silence is not a lack of information, but a theological statement? What if the hidden life is not a blank page, but a sacred preparation? Let that sit for a moment. In Luke 2:52, we are told that Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. The Greek word used here is oxano, to grow, to mature, to develop. This is not a casual phrase. It implies a process, a formation, a hidden trajectory. From a Jewish perspective, this makes perfect sense. The tradition of Hezekiah, spiritual silence and quietness, was not unknown to Israel. Even in the Psalms, the word Selah appears, inviting a pause, a sacred moment of reflection. In that sense, silence is not absent. Silence is a form of presence. But the question remains, what did Jesus do during those years? What shaped him into the Messiah? What prepared him for the moment when he would step into the Jordan River and hear the voice of the Father? The Gospel gives us only a hint. He was known as the carpenter's son. He was known as the carpenter. Matthew 13:55 records the people of Nazareth asking, "Is this not the carpenter's son?" Mark 6:3 adds, "Is not this the carpenter?" That is a strong historical friction. If Jesus had spent 18 years traveling in the East, if he had spent his formative years in India, Tibet, or Persia, would the people of Nazareth have recognized him as their own carpenter? Would they have spoken of him as if he were simply the boy they had seen grow up? The Gospel suggests no. This is where the hidden life becomes controversial, because there are ancient texts that claim otherwise. One of the most famous is The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ by Nicholas Nadovich, a 19th century Russian traveler. In that text, he claims to have discovered a manuscript in a monastery in Tibet describing Jesus' travels and teachings in the East during the missing years. Now, we must be careful here. This is not canonical scripture. It is not part of the Bible. It is not church tradition. It is an ancient claim, possibly a legend, possibly a forgery, possibly a misunderstood document. But it is also a historical artifact of how people have tried to fill the silence. And it is a reminder that humans hate empty spaces. We hate gaps in the story, so we fill them. We invent details. We create narratives. We make legends. But the question is not whether the story is true or false. The question is, what does the silence itself teach us? What does the Bible's choice to leave out those years tell us about Jesus? It tells us something profound. God does not need to prove himself through spectacle. God does not need to be impressive in public before he is obedient in private. The hidden life is not a failure of record. It is a deliberate theological emphasis. The life of Jesus did not begin in public. It began in obedience. This is the heart of the gospel. This is the heart of the incarnation. In Philippians 2:7, Paul says that Christ emptied himself, Kenosis taking the form of a servant, not just leaving heaven, but humbling himself to the point of anonymity, not just becoming human, but becoming ordinary. This is the mystery. The creator of the universe, the Logos, the Word, who John says was with God and was God, becomes a carpenter in a small town. This is not a poetic metaphor. This is the core of Christian theology. The Logos becomes labor. The Word becomes wood. The king becomes a worker. The one who holds the cosmos together in his hands, the one who sustains all things by the word of his power, chooses to sweat and strain in a small workshop. This is the tension. This is the friction. And this friction is not a contradiction. It is the gospel. The carpenter's hands that shape wood will later be the same hands that shape the world. The nails he drives into wood in Nazareth will later be driven into his own body. And in that moment, the hidden life and the public sacrifice become one continuous narrative. Now let's return to the ancient text. What does Notovich's claim actually say? It claims that Jesus traveled, learned, and studied. It claims that he encountered Eastern wisdom traditions. It claims that some of his teachings resemble Buddhist ethics or Hindu spiritual discipline. From a purely historical standpoint, this is possible. Trade routes existed. The world was connected. Ideas traveled. But from a biblical standpoint, we must be careful. The Gospels never suggest that Jesus learned his wisdom from foreign traditions. They portray him as rooted in Israel's story, rooted in the prophets, the law, and the Torah. The Bible is clear. Jesus is the fulfillment of Israel's hope. His teachings echo the prophets. His mission is the continuation of God's covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So if Jesus did travel, it must be understood in a way that does not undermine the biblical narrative. And here is where we must keep our balance. It is possible to say maybe without saying definitely. It is possible to say this is intriguing without saying this is authoritative. That is the proper scholarly stance. That is what makes this discussion honest. Because if we present the Notovich text as fact, we risk undermining the Gospel's own claims. If we dismiss it entirely, we risk ignoring an ancient voice that might contain a kernel of truth. But we do not need to choose between extremes. We can hold the tension. We can say, this is a possible reality, but the Bible remains the final authority. Now, let's ask a deeper question. Why would God leave the hidden years out of the Gospel? What does this silence accomplish? Perhaps the silence is meant to protect the true meaning. Because if we knew every detail, we might focus on the wrong things. We might focus on travel. We might focus on exotic stories. We might focus on sensational claims. But the gospel is not about Jesus' biography. It is about Jesus' identity. The hidden years force us to ask, who is Jesus? Not where did he go? Not what did he do? But who is he? And the answer is not found in speculation. It is found in the cross. The cross is the center. Everything else revolves around it. So the hidden life is not empty. It is a preparation for the cross. And in that preparation, we see the theology of silence. Because silence is not the absence of God. Silence is the presence of God in a way that does not demand attention. The world is loud. The world demands spectacle. But God often speaks in quiet. He speaks in the small, the hidden, the ordinary. The Israelites learned this again and again. God did not appear in a storm. He did not appear in an earthquake. He appeared in a gentle whisper, a still small voice. And perhaps the hidden life of Jesus is the ultimate expression of that pattern. The world expected the Messiah to appear with glory, but he appears as a child, as a carpenter, as a man who knows the smell of sawdust. This is the paradox, and it is the most profound lesson for our lives. Because we live in a culture that worships visibility. We worship social media. We worship success. We worship fame. We want our lives to be seen. We want our years to matter. We want our stories to be spectacular. But the hidden life of Jesus tells us, God is not impressed by visibility. God is impressed by obedience. God is impressed by faithfulness. The hidden years are not a problem to solve. They are a model to follow. Jesus did not become great by being seen. He became great by being faithful. Now let's return to the text. In Notovich's account, Jesus travels to the East and learns from different spiritual traditions. Some of his teachings sound familiar, some sound different. From a Jewish perspective, this raises questions. The Torah is not a philosophy, it is a covenant. Jesus' identity is not primarily a teacher of ethics. He is the Messiah. He is the Son of God. He is the one who fulfills the law. So if Jesus learned from foreign traditions, it must not replace his identity as Israel's fulfillment. It must not undermine his role as the promised seed. It must not diminish the unique nature of his mission. And here is the key. The Bible itself is selective. John 21:25 says that if everything Jesus did were written down, the world could not contain the books. The gospel is not incomplete. It is intentional. The silence is part of the message. The hidden years are not missing. They are chosen. So what are we to do with this possibility? We can learn something about our own lives. Because the hidden years are not only about Jesus, they are about us. How many of us are living in our own hidden years? How many of us feel like our lives are ordinary? How many of us feel like no one sees our work? No one notices our sacrifice. No one appreciates our faithfulness. But what if those years are not wasted? What if those years are the most important? What if the hidden life is not a problem to solve, but a calling to embrace? The hidden life of Jesus is an invitation to sanctify the ordinary, to see our work as sacred, to see our labor as holy, to see our silence as preparation. Because God is forming us, God is shaping us, God is growing us, the same way He grew Jesus. And in the end, the hidden years lead to the public mission. The hidden years lead to the cross. The hidden years lead to the resurrection. The hidden years lead to salvation. Now let's be honest. There is a temptation here. A temptation to romanticize the hidden years, to treat them like a spiritual fantasy, to turn Jesus into a wandering mystic. But the gospel does not allow that. The gospel insists on historical reality. Jesus lived in Nazareth. He worked as a carpenter. He was known by his neighbors. This is not a romantic story. This is a real story. This is a story of God choosing to enter human history in the most ordinary way. And this is the greatest theological truth of all. The incarnation is not simply God becoming human. It is God becoming ordinary. It is God becoming like us. And the hidden years are the proof. Now, I want to return to the question of the ancient text. Why do we care? Because it forces us to confront the silence. It forces us to ask why the gospel is selective. It forces us to ask what we should do with our own silence. The ancient text may be controversial. It may be disputed. It may be false, but it is also a mirror. It reflects our desire to know everything. It reflects our fear of being ordinary. It reflects our need for certainty. But the gospel offers a different kind of certainty. Not certainty about every detail, but certainty about the purpose. The purpose is the cross. The purpose is the obedience. The purpose is the love. And the hidden years teach us that God's work is often invisible before it becomes visible. God's work is often quiet before it becomes loud. God's work is often hidden before it is revealed. And this is the most profound message of the hidden life. God is working in your hidden years too. God is shaping you. God is preparing you. God is growing you. And one day, your hidden life will produce fruit. One day, your quiet obedience will become a public testimony. One day, your ordinary labor will become sacred. One day, your hidden years will be revealed as the preparation for your purpose. Let that sit for a moment, because this is not just a story about Jesus. This is a story about the way God works in the world. God does not always start with miracles. God often starts with obedience. God often starts with silence. God often starts with a hidden life. And the gospel teaches us that the most powerful thing in the universe is not spectacle. It is faithfulness. Now, I want to leave you with one final thought. What if the Bible's silence is actually a mirror? What if we are obsessed with the hidden years because we are afraid of our own hidden years? What if we want Jesus, life to be spectacular at every moment because we want our lives to be spectacular at every moment. But the gospel tells us something different. It tells us that the most sacred thing in God's eyes is not fame. It is obedience. It is faithfulness. It is humility. It is the willingness to live in the hidden years without knowing when the breakthrough will come. And if you are living in a season of silence, let this be your encouragement. You are not forgotten. You are not wasted. You are not irrelevant. You are being prepared. Your hidden years are not empty. They are sacred. They are the formation of your destiny. And when the time comes, the world will see the fruit. The world will see the purpose. The world will see the power. But for now, you are called to faithfulness, to silence, to obedience, to trust. And that is the greatest lesson of the hidden life of Jesus, because the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, not to be seen but to be faithful, not to be famous but to be obedient, not to be understood but to be trusted. And in that hidden obedience, the world was saved. Now before you go, one final detail. The gospel gives us a clue about why Jesus begins his public ministry when he does. In Luke 3:23, we are told that Jesus was about 30 years old when he began. This is not accidental. In Jewish tradition, the age of 30 is the age of full maturity and public service. The priests began their duties at 30. The Levites began their service at 30. Even rabbinic tradition often identifies 30 as the age when a man enters full public responsibility. This is not a random number. It is a cultural and religious marker. It tells us that the hidden years were not wasted. They were the required preparation for the public mission. The hidden years were not a gap. They were the apprenticeship. They were the training. They were the forming of the one who would change the world. And that is why the silence matters. Because the silence is not a mystery to solve. It is a model to follow. And if you are in your own hidden years, remember this. God is not absent. God is preparing. God is forming. God is growing. And one day, your hidden life will reveal the purpose. One day, your ordinary labor will become extraordinary. One day, your silence will become a testimony, and the world will see that God was working in you all along.